and servants that the Philistine envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelek said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So we're going to go down to verse 12 instead of discussing the wife, the lie that he told concerning his wife in fear of his life. So we go down to 12, and we see that the promise was beginning to unfold. The inheritance was beginning to come forth because of his obedience to the word of God, because of his obedience to communicating with God and listening to God, that he reaped what he had sown 100-fold. And so many times we sow and we say, "God, give us that 100-fold blessing." But you have to sow in the land where God is telling you to sow. You have to make sure that when the money is sown, that God said, "Give it in this land because I'm going to bless you." It can't be any land that you just sow into and say, "God, give me 100-fold blessing," but it's listening to the Spirit and the voice of God that tells you, "This is the blessing right here. Sow in this land." So he began to be rich, and wealth just continued to grow for him. And then it says, so the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of Abraham, the Philistines stopped it up and filled it with earth, which means they saw his prosperity. They saw that he was growing. They saw what God was doing in his life, and they had to stop it. They had to stop the blessing in their minds anyway. They had to stop his prosperity. So they got it together in their mind that if we stop up the wells, his blessings will stop. If we do something to counteract what's going on in his life, surely the blessing will not be there anymore. And when we look into our lives and we see people that are trying to stop the blessing, or we see the devil trying to distract us, discourage us, and stop the blessing from coming. We've heard God say go to point A, but because we're discouraged, confused, or we're listening to other people, we try to convince God that we need to go to point B. But if we stay on track and we sow where God has told us to sow, 100-fold will come to you. It's guaranteed and it's promised because you're following the voice of God and you're following the reasoning of God and not people. So Abimelek comes to Isaac and he says, "You know what? You have become too powerful. You got to go." So his wealth began to intimidate the people around him. Not because he wasn't sharing, but because it was just happening to him. And so many times when the blessing is upon your life and people begin to hate on you for that, you don't even understand how. All you know is that you are serving God and you're following his plan, and the windows of heaven are just open and they're flowing in your life. But people will begin to be angry and jealous of this and wonder, how are you doing it? And they only want to know so they can stop it, not so they can be a part of it or help you, but they want to stop the blessing so that you can look like and become one of them instead of becoming a child of God in the blessing. So we never want people to take the blessing from us because we're not paying attention, because we can actually lose the blessing because we're not focused on God. But the blessing was guaranteed. And when you receive your prophecies, when you receive your visions and revelations from God concerning your destiny, it's a guarantee. Regardless of how many people want to plug up your hole that the blessing is coming out of, it still can be dug up again. It still can be dug no matter where you go because the blessing is with you. It's not in that one hole that they've covered up. is not in that one area that they've tried to stop you by talking about you, by gossiping about you, by bringing shame upon you, but the blessing is in you. So therefore, wherever you go, the blessing goes with you. It's not a physical thing is what people are trying to stop, but it is a spiritual thing. So the blessing was with Isaac because of the promise of God, not because of the labor of his hands. His hands was blessed because of the promise. So we have to understand where the blessing is coming from, not from the labor of your hands alone, but there's a promise behind the labor. The power of the Holy Ghost behind what you're doing is what's making the blessing flow, regardless of who is trying to stop it. So they said, we're going to plug it up because surely that's where the blessing is in all these wells, because you got to be able to feed the livestock. He's got to be able to drink water himself. But if we plug up these wells, then the blessing stops. There's nothing to grow, nothing to do. But God was in a bigger picture than what their little scrawny minds were in. God is in the spirit realm blessing, and it pours out into the flesh. So we go on a little further because Abimelek says, you're too powerful for us in verse 16, so you have to go. So it says in 17, so Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the Valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which they had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names as his father. So Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But they continued to argue and quarrel with Isaac each time he dug a well up and there was water found. And then Isaac would name these wells as he moved on. So he dug the well, the water gushed out of it, the blessing flowed. They would be angry. Nope, you can't have this one. They plug it back up, go further. And he just kept going further and further and further out. Because everywhere he tried, they quarreled with him. And it didn't discourage Isaac. It didn't distract him. It didn't take him off course and off plan, because I think by the second or third, you can't have this, we probably would have got a little angry and told him to show us some paperwork or proof or something that I can't have this. But Isaac didn't do all of that because he stayed focused on the promise. He stayed focused on God, on his inheritance. So even though he knew his father had dug all those wells, even though he knew he was only redigging something that was already done, it wasn't anything new, but he kept moving. He didn't quarrel with them. He just kept moving, and he kept moving to the next one, and he kept moving to the next one, until he finally got to a well that they didn't quarrel over him with. And then once he found that one, it says, now the Lord has given us room and we will flourish in the land. So once he found a place where there was no more quarreling, he said, okay, then God will bless us here. You know, he didn't complain and say, oh, this is too far out. This is too far from our people. We need somewhere closer. Give us the first well that we dug up. Give us that we redug up. Give us this one or that one. But he said, okay, it's further out from them, which is what they wanted, because they didn't want him close to them, because he just had too much stuff, and they didn't like it. So they tried to push him as far away as they possibly can. And so many times we're in a situation where we're being pushed out and we're being named or labeled, and it's in a bad way. And we don't understand why, because we're sharing, we're flourishing, we're prospering, and we would think that people would think that was a good thing for us. But depending upon the people that you are around, depending on the environment, the atmosphere of your company, determines the happiness of your prosperity. Because so many times people like you as long as you are equal to or less than them. But when you begin to come out of where you were, poverty and lack and discouragement and sickness and disease, you're healed from it, and you're thinking that people are going to rejoice with you. This is a story to let us know that that doesn't always happen, because now your testimony has been manifested. The blessing has now come forth. The blessing that you've talked about for years and years, you know, the job that you kept saying you were going to get, and whatever it is that showed God is in your life, and you wanted people to rejoice with you, and they didn't. And you were shocked, because these were the people that said, "Girl, I'll be glad with you. I'm going to rejoice with you. I'm going to be there too. I'm so happy God is going to bring you out." And then when you're brought out, and the blessing begins to flow, and then you begin to wonder, where is the celebration that you thought you were going to get? Where is the praise dance that you thought people were going to be dancing with you? It's not there. It's not there. And we get distracted and we get discouraged, because even though you've overcome that, you still have a way to go to the completion of the blessing. You can't stop with distractions there. Just because they plugged up that well with the earth, you have to keep moving, because there's more blessings to come. There's more testimonies to come. There's more to it. But if you stay at the first well and get distracted and discouraged, then you're messing up the blessing that was promised to you. You are the one that's delaying it. So Isaac had to move on. He found a place. They didn't bother him. They didn't quarrel with him, and they let him have it. And it says in 23, from there he went to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Isaac built an altar there and called it the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. So because of his obedience, because he didn't quarrel with them and say, "But God has promised me this, and you better move out of the way," and he didn't go through all of that. He trusted God. In the midst of everything that was going on, in the midst of all the distractions and the words that were spoken to him, he yet focused on what God promised his father, and God was letting him know that it's now going to be poured out into you. And he began to talk to the Lord at that point and give God thanks for it, because God began to let him know, not only did I promise it to Abraham, but I'm promising the same blessing to you. And God has promised us a blessing, and we know God has promised that blessing to us, but we want it now. We don't want the distractions. We don't want the discouragement. We don't want people fighting against us. We want everyone to celebrate with us. We want everyone to understand the process, and it's just not going to happen, because they're not a part of that blessing. So it's not going to happen. That is your blessing. And if you be like Joseph and you begin to tell that blessing too soon or to the wrong ears, it will begin to derail into a whole nother place that you don't want to go through. So keep the blessing and stay focused on the blessing. If no one celebrates with you, celebrate with yourself. If they send you away because you are prospering, then go away. But go away in peace, knowing that this is your blessing, knowing that this is yours. And so many times when we say God is sending us somewhere, or God revealed to me that I need to do this to get my blessing, and someone else may look at you and say, that's not possible. That's not right. And they